Oral questions. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From this government, we've seen qualified budgets. We've seen the AG question the use of an accountability practice that included a contingency fund, something unheard of. In other words, we've seen this government presenting their interpretation of facts rather than the facts themselves. On several occasions, we've witnessed the Gallant government's mathematical creativity. One such example that I've been trying to examine is the claim that this government has cut the deficit in half. For some reason, the Premier has resisted proving his claim to this House by giving the exact figures. Since he is not willing to answer the question, maybe I could ask the Minister of Finance, would she ask and define exactly how we arrived at this deficit being cut in half? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we've been working very hard on the priorities of New Brunswickers since we became their government. Mr. Speaker, New Brunswickers and the people of our province want us to invest in education, they want us to invest in health care, and they want us to grow the economy. Mr. Speaker, the people of New Brunswick want us to be fiscally responsible, but not on the back of the priorities of the economy, education, and health care. Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't get that. When he was the Minister of Finance, he cut into education, he cut into health care, he cut into things that would stifle our growth, and then he wondered why, after 4 years of being the Minister of Finance, the economy didn't grow. Well, Mr. Speaker, we understand that we have to make strategic investments in the priorities of New Brunswickers to help grow the economy, create opportunities for people to stay here, to come back here to New Brunswick, and of course, that they have a strong education system and healthcare system waiting for them that is right here in their province, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
So I can understand why the Minister of Finance can say she didn't get any budget questions, because she's not allowed to answer any budget questions. So I guess let's turn our attention to the recently revealed agreement with 6 First Nations communities regarding the Sisson Mine project. Now, the interesting part about that is that we have 6 chiefs that have signed on, and we have the 9 First Nations that have not. So, you know, the concern is 6 chiefs were very interested in a tax deal. It hasn't been addressed. It isn't fair for all New Brunswickers. It's been basically used as a tool by the chiefs to get the province to sign on to it. Say, we'll sign on to the Sisson Mine. My question is this. Has the Premier also reached agreement with the remaining 9 First Nations communities? Does the Sisson Mine project require their agreement also before it can proceed?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be very happy to answer his questions about the budget, as will the Minister of Finance. Obviously, I like to take some of the questions of the Leader of the Opposition. It's kind of ironic to hear him say that he'd rather I stay seated down, Mr. Speaker, sat down so that someone else could speak, but I'll gladly answer his questions. If you look at 2014-2015, the deficit for that fiscal year was $388 million, Mr. Speaker. The deficit that we just introduced for the 2017-2018 budget is $192 million, Mr. Speaker. So we cut the deficit in half. Now, yes, absolutely. If the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to use that number, we think those are the right numbers to use. But if he wants to use the 2013-2014 fiscal year, when he was the Minister of Finance, the deficit was $498 million. Again, this next fiscal year, $192 million, which would be much more than cutting it by half, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Interesting, Mr. Speaker. So one case the contingency fund is in, the next case the contingency fund is out, and I guess it's another play on numbers, because that's how the government works best. So the question that my last question, and maybe these are going to come behind the ball here, so I'll ask this one again. I was asking the question about the 9 First Nations that did not sign the Sisson Mine agreement. Are their signatures required, as we are saying the 6 that signed are, in order for Sisson Mine project to proceed? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about the deficit. So, Mr. Speaker, if he wants to keep asking questions, I'll gladly give him the answers. Mr. Speaker, the contingency reserve that we put in place was always taken out, Mr. Speaker, or identified properly when it came to the actual budgets. When they were taken out, Mr. Speaker, and we gave what happened during the fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, we'd make it very clear that the deficit would be without the reserve, or if ever there was a piece used, we would let them know. Mr. Speaker, we hit our targets. Mr. Speaker, we are reducing the deficit. Mr. Speaker, black on white, the fiscal years of 13-14 or 14-15 had the deficit at $498 million and $389 million respectively. Mr. Speaker, it is now, for the next fiscal year, at $192 million. So no matter which way the Leader of the Opposition is trying to slice it, we cut the deficit in half, grew the economy, and invested record amounts in education and health care.
Chef d'opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, it's interesting. We forecast the deficit cut in half. Did we forecast the debt growing to $2.4 billion? Was that part of the plan? It seems like when that was put together, it was like $600 or $700 million less than it currently is. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? The rest of the story is the commitments that have been made that exceed the $2.4 billion are the ones that will hit the books in 2020, 21, 22. So the Premier wants to forecast a number that cuts the deficit in half, not where we are currently today, and say, oh, I know I can come up with a number somewhere because I'll use the one down the road a bit. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the current debt. 2.4, that wasn't part of the plan. And what about the numbers that aren't in there, Mr. Speaker? We're hitting over $3 billion, and this government's just hitting stride on spending money. So where are we going to end up right now? When the Premier agreed that including all of the commitments that aren't in the books, 2.4 is the tip of the iceberg. We'll hit $3 billion on commitments for a joke before the spending spree government is done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
I just have two questions to the Leader of the Opposition rebuttal.
Order.
When he was the Minister of Finance, how much did he add to the debt? That's question number one. Question number two, when he was the Minister of Finance, where was the liability for the nursing homes, Mr. Speaker? Were they on our books, as the Auditor General requested that they be, Mr. Speaker, or were they somewhere else? Two very simple questions for a man who professes to do politics differently, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the debt. And the reason I know the commitment's showing up in 2021, because guess what happened in 2010? $900 million of commitments done by the previous Liberal government dumped in our lap when we showed up. So that's where the deficit went in 2010 and 14. $900 million. Huge project. Committed in the election frenzy and dumped to the next government. The same old Liberal philosophy that's happening right now, over and over again. And the AG, you want to talk about the assets of the nursing homes? That benefited the government by another $80 or $90 million of revenue. They aren't talking much about that, but more money into the coffers to spend as you will, plus $500 million of new taxes. Mr. Speaker, there's no end to how we generate an economy by spending our tax dollars first. It's pitiful, Mr. Speaker. The budget indicates the First Nations agreement amount will increase by $7 million in 2017. The Premier revised the House as this figure was calculated using the old agreement or the new agreement. Is a revised figure provided in the House?
The Honourable Premier.
He wants to talk about us, and he wants to talk about 2010. Doesn't feel like talking about what was in the middle of that, Mr. Speaker. And I understand he won't answer the question of how much he added to the debt when he was the Minister of Finance. I understand why he doesn't want to talk about his record as the Minister of Finance of growing the economy of the province, Mr. Speaker. And I understand why he wants to try to focus on us and not his record of slashing into education and health care. Mr. Speaker, is because he had the wrong approach. He thought he could cut his way to prosperity. Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a balanced approach, one in which we're going to balance the books by 2020. We are hitting all of our targets, unlike the Leader of the Opposition when he was the Minister of Finance, missing almost all of them. Mr. Speaker, he cannot fathom today. He does not understand it, so he says it has to be made up because he cannot understand how we as a government have worked with the people of New Brunswick to cut the deficit in half, to grow the economy, and to invest record amounts in education and health care, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we've learned that they apparently do need the 9 other First Nations to tie into this because they can't say that, no, they have a deal going forward. So what was it? It was a smoke on the tax deal because the 6 First Nations had to have it, and so they gave up the Sisson Mine, and they tied that together and said, oh, we're good, knowing that the other First Nations group would stand and fight and do that for them. So another smoke and mirrors deal. Mr. Speaker, we don't see negotiation from this government. We see capitulation. And that's over and over again. So let's get back to the debt. We're saying we got a $2.4 billion debt. And I'm telling you what happened in 2010, and I'm telling you where it was when you came in 2014. You did not inherit a $900 billion commitment from somebody else. But I know the next government sitting here is going to inherit it, because that's what you're doing. And there's no end of it. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Premier, tell me, how much is the total debt committed now with 2.4 plus all of the commitments?
Time member. The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, le leadership, c'est prendre le blâme, c'est prendre la responsabilité. Alors, lorsque le chef de l'opposition était le ministre des Finances, les faits sont les suivants. Il n'a pas pu faire croître l'économie. En effet, nous avons vu l'économie rétrécir, Monsieur le Président, sous son gouvernance comme ministre des Finances. Il n'a pas pu faire ses cibles pour réduire le déficit. Il n'a pas pu, Monsieur le Président, équilibrer le budget à l'intérieur des 4 ans de son mandat, comme qu'il a promis aux gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Monsieur le Président, je vais l'expliquer pourquoi. Parce que nous ne pouvons pas couper en éducation, en santé et dans des choses qui vont nous aider à faire croître l'économie et croire qu'on va avoir les résultats qu'on veut. Nous, on comprend ça, Monsieur le Président, c'est en raison de ça que nous travaillons avec les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Nous investissons de façon stratégique pour faire croître l'économie. Nous avons réduit le déficit par la moitié, tout en investissant des montants records en éducation et en santé.
Mr. Speaker, you know, it's interesting to see when you talk about the numbers of where they were, and the Premier talks about 2015, and the lead up 14 and into 15. So I think it's important for the Premier, because he talks a lot about 2015, to be very clear on what happened in 2015 that caused a spike. Now, a spike because it all drops off in 16, 17 in the forecast. So all this drops off. So what happened in 2014? Could the Premier be very clear on what happened? And would he agree, in case he needs a memory jog here, that the forestry sector and the industry, the oil industry, were the key contributors? In fact, the majority, 80% plus, maybe even 90% of the reason. And being the case, could the Premier elaborate as well? What did he do when he first came to office that allowed that to happen? Because, Mr. Speaker, the answer is nothing, in case you can't remember.
The Honourable Premier.
Le chef de l'opposition, et j'utilise ces termes de façon hésitante, Monsieur le Président, parce qu'être leader, être un chef, c'est en effet prendre ses responsabilités et c'est de donner le crédit, Monsieur le Président. Mais on voit le chef de l'opposition faire exactement le contraire. Il essaie de blâmer les autres et essaie de prendre tout le crédit, Monsieur le Président. Il veut savoir qu'est-ce qui arrive en 2015. Je vais lui dire, Monsieur le Président, les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick ont travaillé très fort. Les entreprises de notre province ont travaillé très fort. Les gens se sont ralliés ensemble pour essayer de continuer d'être compétitifs au niveau international. Et, Monsieur le Président, nous, comme le gouvernement, on a fait ce qu'on a pu pour les appuyer. On va continuer de faire ça, Monsieur le Président, parce que nous sommes en train d'obtenir des résultats. Nous avons coupé le déficit par la moitié, tout en faisant croître l'économie, tout en investissant davantage en santé et en investissant des montants records en éducation, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, if you look up the details in 2015, you will find that the forestry sector and then the refinery were the key components to 2015. There isn't any doubt about that. It's very well defined, and so just for the information. Looking forward, the Gallant government budget contains a chart showing their multi-year plan. This plan shows an increase in revenue of $500 million over the next 4 years. According to page 172 of main estimates, the Premier plans to somehow get another $200 million of tax revenue from the Brunswickers, which still leaves $300 million to account for. How does the Premier account for the additional $300 million? Does he plan to sell off provincial assets, or is there yet to be reeled another tax? Another $300 million of revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I get the Leader of the Opposition, coming from his background, thinks that everything in the province, all the good should be given, the credit should be all given to the oil and gas industry, Mr. Speaker. We believe that all New Brunswickers worked hard in 2015. We believe that all businesses from all sectors worked hard, Mr. Speaker, in an uncertain world, in an economy nationally that's not going where we'd all like it to go at the moment, Mr. Speaker. But New Brunswickers stepped up and they worked hard. And humbly, as their government, we are trying to support support them, Mr. Speaker. We are creating things like the Youth Employment Fund to keep our young people here in the province and give a skilled workforce to the businesses. We have cut small business taxes 3 years in a row, Mr. Speaker. We've raised the minimum wage 3 years in a row to give those that need a little extra help the support that they need. Mr. Speaker, we're investing strategically in our infrastructure to stimulate the economy and ensure that we're able to compete internationally for years to come. And Mr. Speaker, we're getting things done when it comes to projects like the Sisson Mine, unlike the Leader of the Opposition when he's the Minister.
Chef des Oppositions.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier is correct. He is investing heavily. He's investing heavily in everywhere, everybody, everything, trying to say we've got an economy that's growing, an economy that is 34% capital invested, primarily tax dollars. Jobs that are created, well, we're still looking for those, but tax dollars. In the third quarter fiscal update, the government goes into detail about a $1 million expenditure for consulting work in relation to the strategic program. The review, MC Business Solutions, is mentioned in having received $882,000. We talk about investing heavily, Mr. Speaker. However, in public accounts supplementary supplier list, McGuinness Cooper Business Solutions is listed as having received $480,000. Can the Premier explain the discrepancy between the public accounts figure of $480,000 and the third quarter fiscal update figure of $882,000? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, évidemment, je vais continuer de parler de la situation fiscale. Nous avons malheureusement le chef de l'opposition qui essaie d'oublier qu'est-ce qu'il a fait lorsqu'il était en gouvernement, lorsqu'il était lui-même le ministre des Finances. Monsieur le Président, nous avons vu sous son gouvernance comme ministre des Finances une économie qui était en train de rétrécir, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons vu des coupures en éducation et en santé. Monsieur le Président, nous, on travaille énormément fort avec les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick pour investir, pour faire croître l'économie, pour investir stratégiquement et de façon record en éducation et en santé. So, Mr. Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition talks about some of the investments we're making and being against them, I'd like him to tell the people in New Brunswick what he's against. Is he against the tourism infrastructure investments or the tourism investments in general that are record-setting by our government? Against reducing the small business tax, against $45 million for more for universities, against the record investments of 4.9% increase in education? What would he cut? Again, Mr.
Premier. Leader of the Official Opposition.
So the Premier's talked about a balanced approach. Expenses have gone up 4% on average. The only balance is the tilt towards taxation, $500 million. The spending in any category has gone up dramatically. As we know, the Premier's political appointee, Lynn Hoyt, had a GNB email address that redirected people to his McGuinness Cooper email. Mr. Hoyt is also listed as a lead on the Strategic Review Program, the org chart replacing Michael Hogan. Mr. Hoyt was also listed as a lead on the Deliverology org chart. Can the Premier advise the House how much of this $882,000 spent on consulting and building a Strategic Review Program is in fact compensation for Mr. Hoyt? Thank you.
The Honourable Premier.
Président, je ne vais pas commencer à parler des individus, des ressources humaines sur le paquet de la Chambre ici, mais qu'est-ce que je peux vous parler de comment la révision stratégique des programmes nous a aidé, Monsieur le Président, à investir davantage dans les priorités des gens de la province. Comment que la révision stratégique des programmes nous a aidé à identifier la capacité fiscale pour non seulement réduire le déficit par moitié, mais aussi d'investir davantage en éducation et en santé. And Mr. Speaker, the Strategic Program Review has given us the fiscal capacity to invest in things that will help grow the economy. Mr. Speaker, we have seen in 2015 a record growth year for the economy because of the hard-working people of our province stepping up and making it happen. And Mr. Speaker, it grew again in 2016 and it's estimated to grow again in 2017. Not at the same rates in 16 and 17, but it's compounded off of a great year in 2015. So, Mr. Speaker, we are working hard with New Brunswickers and getting things done for their priorities.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the economy could show growth in future years, in the next 2 or 3 years, certainly getting through the election period because of the excessive amount of money that's being dumped out into New Brunswick. And then what happens? We're all left to pay for it. We'll all got a debt that'll exceed all expectations. We'll have taxes that are the highest in the country. And then we'll worry about it the next time around. We won't worry about it now. So the Premier wants to talk about, or he'd like to pretend that we're talking about facts. I want to talk about facts, and I'm looking for a clip that goes back a while ago. The Premier may have it, that where I asked to talk to him or debate with him at any point in time regarding the economy of this province. And he said, well, maybe when you're a leader of opposition, I'll do that. So I'm trying to find that clip. Now, I haven't found it yet, in all sincerity, but I am leader of opposition now, and I will do it. And I will do it based on facts, not based on spun facts. Anytime, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
There's nothing like accepting a meeting from some guy yelling at you across the hall here, Mr. Speaker. We have some serious challenges and some serious opportunities as a province. We have to make sure that we work very hard and stay diligent on the priorities of the people of our province. And they want us to invest in education and invest in health care. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite keeps talking about the spending that we're doing. Well, we think it's investments, Mr. Speaker, and we think they're strategic. And we made sure they were by going through the strategic program review to identify the priorities of New Brunswickers and what elements and investments would help the priorities of New Brunswickers advance. So, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition owes it to the people of New Brunswick to get up on his feet and tell us, would he cut the 4.9% increase in education, the 3.3% increase in health care that we did, the 17% increase for tourism, Mr. Speaker? Will he look at his colleagues and say that he would not invest in the infrastructure in their ridings, or the mayors in the gallery that he doesn't want to invest in their communities, Mr. Speaker?
Member for Southwest Miramichi Bay Devin.
So, Mr. Speaker, I guess he won't debate our leader. Mr. Speaker, we're discussing improvements in education. The fact that our Francophone school sector is the fastest improving sector in the country is something to be proud of as a New Brunswicker. For 4 straight years, this sector has continuously improved. But the trend of one sector fast and continuously improving is alarming, whereas we have 2 sectors in our province. Either way, it still presents a good opportunity. First, we must understand this trend. I asked the Minister of Education for the 3rd day in a row to tell New Brunswick about this trend of how one sector is fast improving.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I answered that question numerous times yesterday, whereas we want to congratulate the sector, the Francophone sector, for achieving good results, Mr. Speaker. And there's still a lot more improvement that we have to make, and that's what we're going to do with our record investments in education, making sure we put the priorities in the right place. But, Mr. Speaker, as we talked about it yesterday, is that we're going to be sharing those best practices, what the Francophone sector does with the Francophone sector does an excellent job taking the community at heart, working with their community. They have also examples in the GSF and the PALC, which is a policy that's put in place to make sure we work with the communities, working with the cultural sector, and really embracing education, Mr. Speaker. Also, the Francophone sector does a great job on performance management, and we're going to be using those performance management measures also in our Anglophone sector that we did table on the floor of the legislature too long ago with the 2 education plans. And, Mr. Speaker, we're really proud of working with our educators throughout the entire province, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Southwest Miramichi Bay Devin.
Mr. Speaker, the community effort he's speaking of, I think we can both agree that both English and French-speaking people in our province both take great pride in the education of their children and their communities. But not understanding the detail for what one sector is actually doing to get these results is prohibiting me from helping the Minister to be successful in his portfolio. We know that learning, sharing, and leveraging best practices is the best way to improve education results in the world. So I'm going to ask the Minister today, what are we doing to ensure that we are sharing what's working in the Francophone sector with the Anglophone sector? What are we doing as a province to understand how they're improving and sharing this knowledge?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say today, unlike the opposition opposite, where they muzzled the principals for years, and this year, for the first time, we've had principals from around the province get together to share best practices. We have people communicating, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we didn't have before. We feel that our education sector is doing some great work. On the Anglophone sector, talking about digital literacy, talking about all of the advancements we're making in the technology sector, Mr. Speaker, in math, the Anglophone sector is actually sharing those best practices with the Francophone sector. So it's working together, Mr. Speaker. And what we see here today, day after day after day, is trying to find, again, a wedge issue to try and divide and conquer here in the province, Mr. Speaker, and that is wrong. It's wrong, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about the good things that we're doing here in education. I'm asking the opposition once again to talk about the good things in education, Mr. Speaker, and not try and find a divide and conquer issue.
Member for Southwest Miramichi Bay Devin.
Mr. Speaker, I am talking about the good things. The good thing that we're a Francophone sector. I mean, it's hard to believe that somebody on the opposition bench would actually discover this and then celebrate this for the Francophone sector of our province. So what I would say, Mr. Speaker, is he's not answering the question. The details are important. The hard work of New Brunswick teachers must be celebrated, and we have some of the best in Canada. And we know they need government most of the time to be out of their way and support the progress. We know that for years, the ability to learn, share, and leverage best practices was almost non-existent, leaving our teachers alone, high and dry. Part of the reorganization of the former government to reorganize the districts was to break down the silos. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask today, what are we doing to ensure the new money invested in this budget is being spent in the right way? Have we learned from the Francophone example and allocated resources in that manner?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, that's exactly what we're doing, and we are going to be making sure that the resources that we have are put in the right place to be able to help all of our students throughout the province, Mr. Speaker. We're looking at taking the best practices from both the Anglophone sector, the Francophone sector, working with our educators. I've been throughout the province since I've been Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development, visiting the schools, seeing the faces light up in the classroom where they see innovation taking place, Mr. Speaker, seeing the principals and the teachers working with other schools, having the districts working together, both on the Francophone and Anglophone sector. There's many, many, many examples, Mr. Speaker, where our education system is doing great things for our students, working with their families, working with their communities. This is not just about teachers. This is about taking the whole community working together to be able to educate our children here, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we're doing in the Department of Education, is working with our collaborators to make sure that we have the best education system moving forward and putting record investments in the right place.
Member for New Maryland Sunbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I first want to acknowledge the snow fighters that brave the cold and the terrible conditions on behalf of all of us in this province. We all certainly appreciate it, and I know the Minister shares that. But I want to talk, Mr. Speaker, about staffing levels and equipment levels in the various depots in the province. CBC was able to obtain documents on the 2015 winter season about drivers and snow fighters having to work long 20-hour, 16-hour, 18-hour shifts back to back to back for days on end. So I'm wondering if the Minister could stand today and tell us what he has done to curb those issues and how he staffs those sheds. Does he use some sort of formula or format to do that?
Honourable Minister of Department of Supply and Transportation Infrastructure. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for the question, a very important question. At DTI, we take the safety of our employees, the safety of the traveling public, and New Brunswickers is extremely serious. It's our number one priority. And I can tell you the staffing arrangements at the garages are very similar to when the changes that were made under the former Conservative government. That's the procedures that we're following, the changes that were made to the winter maintenance program under the previous Conservative government. Staff work extremely hard. There's procedures that are followed by the districts and the district engineers. Follow those procedures to ensure the safety of our employees, and we're very proud of the work that our employees do. And I'll be making a minister's statement here very shortly in the House to speak of some of the very great things that our men and women at DTI do each and every day to ensure the safety of New Brunswickers, and will continue to work with our employees.
Member for New Maryland Sunbury.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can appreciate the fact that the Minister says that they follow those staffing levels, but I'm hearing from around the province from all different areas, from people that don't want to speak publicly because they don't want to spotlight Sean on them. Mr. Speaker, and it's easy to say that the levels are being followed, there's another way for the minister to go about proving it, and is to put the documents and those numbers out on the table for everybody to see. Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing from a lot of different areas where some maintenance depots are down to one grader. Some maintenance depots are short 2 or 3 employees because they haven't been filled and they haven't been posted. Those positions are left empty. So, Mr. Speaker, what this does is it leaves their fellow co-workers in a dangerous situation. It leaves the public at large in a dangerous situation. So I wonder right now if the minister is aware of any of those deficiencies in different sheds with equipment and manpower, and how he's going to correct it.
Time member. Honourable Minister responsible for Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Excuse me again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I'm not sure what the intent of the member opposite is. I know I've seen correspondence from him. He's had conversations with me when the previous Minister of DTI made a decision that we would tender out winter maintenance and make sure that everybody had a fair opportunity for equipment rentals around our province. I know he approached me after I became Minister and said, you got to get rid of that tendering process. I've seen recent emails that he sent to the local engineer asking to hire certain people, and when I checked the name of the people that he want hired, I checked the Tory donation list, see that person contributed greatly to their party. Mr. Speaker, we're not about politics here. We're about working with our department. We're about working and doing things very fairly in the Department of Transportation Infrastructure. We've taken the politics out of that. I know he wants to bring it back. I'm not sure that's the direction that his new leader wants. We know that his new leader wants to cut everything and you know, all the great investments that we're making as a government to grow our economy, but we're not following that direction, and I'm certainly not going to follow his direction.
Time for order. Time for question period has expired.